Brett, how you doing, man?
I'm good, man. That was the most unique intro music I've heard doing radio spots all year long. I don't know if that comes with a trophy or a plaque of some sort, but it's been one. Congratulations.
Yeah, we're pretty eclectic over here. You never know what you're gonna get from day to day. What's the mood in Starkville? Obviously, after kind of riding the ship after blowout losses to Georgia and then to Auburn, it looks like Mississippi State's playing good football and entering this matchup pretty confident.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird a split in the fan base because some of them are taking the reductionist view of, well, State beat LSU by 30 at home, and we just saw Alabama kind of, I don't know, struggle is the right word, but keep LSU within striking distance for a significant portion of that game. So some of them feel pretty good, and then the flip side, some of them are taking the other reductionist view that you just mentioned of pretty difficult losses to both Auburn and Georgia, and they seem convinced that they can't compete with that elite class in the SEC, or at least this year's team is unable to do that. So there's kind of an interesting mix there amongst the fan base, and I do think there's a lot of optimism around here after Alabama's linebacking core got decimated by injury the way it did against LSU. I think there is a bit of a sense of security there that they wonder if they are going to be able to run the ball more effectively on Alabama than they have in the past, just because Alabama is more depleted than it has been at any point this year.
Brett, I think any conversation with Mississippi State, at least a superficial conversation about the Bulldogs, starts with Nick Fitzgerald, the quarterback. He's very talented as a runner, is improving as a passer. But looking at the stats, Alabama actually has more passing yards than Mississippi State does. So what do you make of him in his second year as a starter? I know he got a lot of attention in the preseason and has done some good things. Where is his progression kind of right now?
I don't know that he's given the opportunity. He's been given that opportunity to show that he's progressed. And, I mean, last week against UMass was the first time Mississippi State had a game decided by fewer than 28 points, I think, and that was an 11-point non-conference win against a team that they were pretty clearly sleepwalking through. So the point I'm trying to make there is Mississippi State has either been totally outclassed in talent, as they were against Auburn and Georgia, or they've been able to run the ball at will against basically all the teams they've beaten this year, or in the case of Texas A&M, they intercepted the Aggies 3 times, and that'll decide a game in and of itself. I actually talked to Greg McElroy earlier today, who your listening audience is very much familiar with, and he said the grade on Nick is incomplete, and I think that's as good as you're going to put it, because there's a lot that we haven't seen out of Nick. One, because Mississippi State has very much leaned on its run game whenever it's been granted that opportunity. And two, Mississippi State's wide receivers haven't really given Nick an opportunity to go downfield as often as we would need to get a decent sample size on whether he's developed as a downfield passer. Donald Gray and Gabe Miles are the two veteran wideouts in that receiving group. Both of those guys are short, which doesn't help downfield throwing, and both of them are injured right now. So it's kind of been a difficult year for State at the wide receiver position. So it's certainly possible that Nick Fitzgerald is a better downfield passer. He's certainly better on the short range throws. He's much more accurate, much more willing to throw in tight windows. But when it comes to being the next Dan Mullen drafted quarterback, by improving that ability by going downfield, we haven't really seen that out of him yet, and we're not sure whether that's his fault or the wide receiving core. We're not really sure where that lies yet. Obviously, Alabama would be a pretty good test for that.
Yeah, and I think most people know Nick Fitzgerald from his running, and to that he's got 5 100-yard rushing performances on the season. He's got 4 straight dating back to BYU. But as a passer, I look at his numbers, and he's got 13 touchdown passes. He's got 10 interceptions. Are those interceptions? Are those receivers? Is that all on Nick Fitzgerald? He's had a lot of tipped pass bad luck. You've seen all the games. So how many of those are on him and just bad decisions?
I can think of at least 3 off the top of my head that are kick balls, but there's a fair share of bad decisions in there too. The one that comes to mind was against BYU. They're on the 20 or something like that, and he has a tight end going on a wheel route, and he just throws it off the back foot, and to the point where he never really gave the tight end a chance. The only way the tight end would have had a chance was if he threw it to the back pylon, and maybe he can get it, maybe he can't, but he throws it off the back foot. It goes to the front pylon. It's an easy interception. He's had a few tipped balls that have been interceptions that otherwise wouldn't have if they had just gone through without being touched, but there's been some bad decisions in there too. So there's kind of a grab bag there for Fitz in the interception department.
Talking to Brett Hudson, he covers Mississippi State for the Commercial Dispatch. You can follow him on Twitter at Brett_Hudson. I think all Alabama fans are too aware of how the injury situation has hit them at linebacker, but you've referenced it a couple times. Mississippi State quietly is they've had a lot of injuries at the wide receiver position. Where are they with that, and how is that affecting their pass game, you think?
Oh, it's affecting them very much so because they haven't quite figured out how they want to throw to the tight end core. They've got a very deep core of tight ends, and they use them in a bunch of different ways, but they haven't really figured out how they want to throw to them other than isolating Jordan Thomas on a curl route once or twice a game. So it's very much impacting the wide receiving core. I mentioned Donald Gray and Gabe Miles earlier. Both of those guys are going to be game day decisions. They went without Keith Mixon against in their last game against UMass. It was funny. He was rolling around on one of those scooters you see guys on all the time, but he also was in full pads and had his helmet hanging off the handlebar of the scooter. So it was one of those things where if it was an emergency situation, as seen by State's coaching staff, he could have ditched that scooter and got on the field, but they didn't want to do that. They wanted to give him a week off in hopes of him being 100% for the Alabama game. And he's a key part of it. He's a slot receiver that could really open things up for State, both passing in the middle of the field where he would obviously be more impactful, but also just drawing more attention to the inside of the field and hopefully opening something up on the outside for some of the young guys that are prominent guys on the outside because of their height, their length. That's something that they didn't really do a great job of recruiting 4 years ago, was recruiting long, tall, wide receivers that can dominate one-on-ones on the outside. They have some of those guys now in Jamal Couch and Reggie Todd, but they're all underclassmen, and it's obviously very difficult for freshmen and sophomores to succeed against Alabama's defense. So they're definitely injured right now, but they're also dealing with addressing a recruiting inefficiency, but doing so maybe for the 2018 and 2019 seasons. It doesn't necessarily help them come Saturday night.
Brett, Alabama's coming off one of its worst offensive performances of the season against LSU, and had a ton of trouble on third down, couldn't extend drives. And I look at this Mississippi State defense, and they're pretty similar to LSU. I mean, and actually in all the rankings, they're a spot ahead of LSU, particularly in yards per play. LSU allows 5.04, Mississippi State's 4.92. It would look to me like with the home environment and that on their side, plus a pretty good defense, that Mississippi State has to like where they are in terms of matching up with Alabama.
Yeah, I surely you remember the 2013 game. Well, it was like 20-7, low scoring, kind of a gross affair. That because it was low scoring, it was obviously close, and Mississippi State was just one or two big offensive plays from throwing themselves right into the thick of winning the game. I think that's what's in store for us because of Mississippi State's much improved defense. Last year's Peter Thurman experiment, the defensive coordinator, was a utter and complete failure. Probably the example of that being no greater than the 51 points Alabama scored on Mississippi State last year. They've been a lot better this year under Todd Grantham, whose reputation speaks for itself, and Alabama fans know him well from his time at Georgia when Mark Richt was still there. It's a much improved unit. Defensive lineman Jeffrey Simmons has been huge, as has the pass rush threat off the edge, Montez Sweat. Those are two guys that could very well stop an Alabama drive or two more or less by themselves. They're both top. I think they're both top 20 in the league in tackles for loss. Montez Sweat is right up there in the top 10. He's one of the best sack artists in the SEC too. So they've really been doing it all up front, which is atypical for a Todd Grantham defense, because in the past he's leaned a lot on linebackers. The list of linebackers from his time at Georgia just goes on for days. Ogletree and Jones and all those guys. And this year he's doing it with a defensive line that's been really, really good once again, despite injury. They're still waiting on Corey Thomas to come back on the defensive line, but Jeffrey Simmons and Braxton Hoyette have stepped in really well. Hoyette's an Alabama guy, by the way. I think he's from Pelham. So that's where the emphasis of this Mississippi State defensive line this defense has been. It's been on the line, and it's obviously been very successful, much more so than last year.
Brett, you can tell Nick Saban has a lot of respect for Dan Mullen, knows how difficult his offenses can be, and knows, quite frankly, that Dan's working with a talent base that's not on par with what he has, or Auburn or Florida. But I wonder, with all these coaching rumors out there, has Dan said anything? Do you think it's affecting him at all? And because his name's being thrown out there because of what he's done in his tenure there in Starkville.
Yeah, it might have affected him the first 3 or 4 times this happened, but obviously he's been a hot name in coaching circles time and again over the last 3 or 4 years at Mississippi State, especially with the success that Dak Prescott had under center here. He addressed it right after Jim McElwain got fired. Once all that went down, or they agreed to let him go, whatever term you want to use. He said he has a great situation here at Mississippi State, and he kind of laid that out by saying he got the facility he wanted. That steel complex that State has now is top notch. They got that stadium expansion a few years ago. They feel like they have everything they need in terms of support system. They've gotten the recruiting steadily improved year over year. So that's how he combated that. It hasn't been brought up since, even as the Butch Jones thing continues to spiral into oblivion. So it hasn't been brought up, and it doesn't seem to be affecting them. What's going on behind the scenes, you hear rumors about what Megan Mullen, Dan's wife, may not have liked in Gainesville, but also that Dan might be looking at a shot at potentially winning a national championship at some point. That's a lot easier to do at Florida than it is at Mississippi State. You hear things like that, and those things will separate themselves into fact or fiction come late November. But in the meantime, it doesn't seem to have affected anybody in the program. It seems like they've been used to this. I'd imagine kind of like what Alabama has been through with the Nick Saban to the NFL rumors. They kind of just take this as an unfortunate aspect of the late November, December cycle, and they just kind of move on with letting silly season just kind of play out in their Twitter feed while they try to ignore it as best they can.
Brett, these two programs really well. How do you see this game playing out on Saturday night?
I really think that 14.5 point spread sounds pretty right. I alluded to it earlier. I think it's going to be a low-scoring kind of game with these two defenses. I think I mentioned that 20-7 game 4 years ago. That actually sounds pretty close. It might be a little high-scoring, than more points than that. Maybe something like 27-13. But that 14-point spread really sounds right. I just feel like Mississippi State's inability to go downfield, not only against the talented Alabama, but really all year long, regardless of opponent, is going to creep up. It's going to keep State from capitalizing, say, opportunities inside the 40 into touchdowns. They might have to settle for a couple of field goals or go for it on 4th down and fail, and Alabama probably won't have that issue. So a low-scoring 14-point win for Alabama sounds about right.